All this area behind us was once sand mine, probably back in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And what you ended up with is they planted Bitou bush as a dune stabiliser. And you can see behind us you're getting this typical hummocks of Bitou bush all through here. And this is probably just one plant. It's very difficult for us to deal with it with these kind of tools because there are many stems. We'd have to cut and paint each one. Normally what we would do, perhaps not in this frontal exposed area, but some of the ones at the back, we would start to splatter these with our splatter guns, and that would knock these bushes out.
By the mid-70s it was realised to be a weed problem, and by the early 80s national parks were trying to work out how to get rid of it. They ran workshops. We went to a workshop in 1984 at Port Macquarie looking at the problem with Bitou. There's 3 subspecies that are in Australia, and they probably could cover the whole of the continent. It'll grow in full sun or shade, and hasn't got much habitat value because it makes a monoculture and so wipes out all the native species and lessens the diversity. So that's its problem. It's just too good, it's too efficient. It's the perfect plant that turns into a weed.
I don't think we would have been able to get all this work done without the grants that we've been getting from, what have we been getting from?
Enviro Fund and Catchment Management.
I mean, as a volunteer group, we've only got limited time, and some of these areas have been just so extensive that they were overwhelming. But I think once we started getting grants and employing contractors, we could work in a much more planned way where we got the contractors to go in and do the very difficult and very dangerous areas, and then we as volunteers could come in and do the follow-up work, much as we're doing today. But we've also been fortunate to get some mutual obligation people who the government pays to come and do volunteer work. And we've had some great people working here. We've had one guy working for about 4 years, I think, even. Yeah. And he was working with 2 others for a couple of years, and they've virtually done this whole section, which is about 25 hectares. So they came through and did initially cut and paint, and where there were very extensive areas, they'd identify them, work around them, then we'd pay the contractor to come in, or we'd come in and I'd come in with the splatter guns, do those, and then they'd do the follow-up in that area. And because we've been able to sustain the effort for 3 to 5 years in some places, we've been able to be very successful in really controlling the Bitou bush on a very large area.
Yeah, once you get one grant and can demonstrate that you can do what you say you're going to do, it seems to make it easier to get the next grant, because you can sort of refer back to what you've achieved previously. And that coordinated effort between the contractors, the volunteers, mutual obligation. You know, we're averaging 1,500 hours of volunteer work a year at the moment, and then the contractors come in as well. And having the contractors makes it easier for the volunteers because you can see the difference as well. It's a bit overwhelming sometimes, but getting one grant, like I say, seems to help to get another grant because you can demonstrate what you're able to achieve and that you can manage the funds appropriately. Well, this latest grant takes all the grants to about $200,000, and they've done more than that in kind, and that's since 2005, so that's about $100,000 a year altogether.
I think it's been a great community building exercise here in South West Rocks. As we noticed last Sunday, we got 25 people to our monthly Dune Care. Plus we have the visiting volunteer program where we provide accommodation for people outside the area. And so it's great at getting across fertilisation between the local community. We get expertise from other groups, mainly they're trained or experienced bush regenerators who come up. So it's getting the message out to a wider population what we're doing here.
And it's good to get, when you get visiting volunteers who come back more than once, because they can see the difference as well. So it's always good to sort of feed off their enthusiasm when they come back and they remember an area how it was, and then they see it how it is. When you've seen it change so gradually when you're here all the time, you sort of, even though you got photographs, you tend to forget how bad it has been, and then somebody comes once a year or every second year and sees the difference.
if we hadn't have been doing this work over the last 5 years, I think you could safely say that probably the intense infestation of Bitou bush would have probably covered 400 or 500 hectares by now. If you go to places like Hat Head, where you can see where they've only just started to get a good program going now, they had the same fire here in 2000, and that area is just dominated by Bitou bush, and it's a very big job now to get that out. Luckily we got started a little bit earlier and managed to stabilise it. And this area here, which has just recently had a fire, it's been relatively quick to come through and do the follow-up, and the species diversity through here is just great. And bird life, we're just finding everywhere we go we're getting a much greater diversity of plants coming up.